Hello everyone, my name is Quinn Knight, and welcome back to How to Not Suck at Star Wars Battlefront II. Today we'll be covering Luke Skywalker yet again, although when it comes to Luke, I feel as though it wouldn't be right to say this video is a remake, because the Luke Skywalker we have in Battlefront 2 today is almost an entirely different hero than the Luke we had at launch. Unlike a hero like Darth Vader, who has went through varying degrees of greatness throughout all of his buffs and nerfs, Luke has went from being one of the worst heroes in Battlefront 2 to being among my favorites and one of the deadliest foes you'll encounter in many situations. Everything from his health and health regen, stamina, movement speed, repulse, force push, and dash strike have all been changed drastically from launch, and Luke can now compete with the likes of heroes like Darth Maul and Rey, and can take on most heroes in a 1v1 situation if you know how to manage your stamina and ability cooldowns correctly. Whether you are a brand new player or a level 40 Luke Skywalker veteran, I hope each of you are able to leave this video having learned something new and are able to apply what you've learned on the battlefront and prove you're worthy of the Skywalker name. If you guys would like to see me continue this series from this point on, as I am considering doing updated guides of each of the heroes in Battlefront 2, be sure to drop a like on this video to let me know. I am open to doing a full reboot of this series, but will only do so if the interest is there, as these videos are very time consuming. Also, if there is a specific hero or class you'd like to see me cover next, be sure to comment that down below so I know what you guys want to see. Anyways guys, with all that being said, let's get into this. So to start off, let's go over the very basics of Luke, and keep in mind that these stats are without the use of any star cards, but don't worry, we will be covering the best setups for Luke a little bit later on. Also, I would like to point out I'm not going to be completely going over the new stamina system in this video. I already discussed it in the Vader guide, and it would get very redundant to completely recover how stamina works in every single guide. Anyways, Luke starts out with 750 HP, which is very average for Saber heroes. When it comes to health regen, Luke is only capable of regenerating 200 health after taking damage, which for lightsaber heroes is very low. However, Luke excels in the speed of his health regen, as his health will begin replenishing almost instantly after taking any damage, with only a 2.5 second delay in between him taking damage and the beginning of regeneration. This is one of the most important things to keep in mind when playing as Luke in any situation. Simply taking a step back and quickly regenerating all of your health to prevent dipping into your non-regenerable health will keep you alive for a lot longer. When it comes to stamina, Luke is among the least affected by the recent changes. Luke has a very average amount of total stamina, but again, he excels in his ability to get that stamina back, and by keeping that in mind and not block spamming 24/7, it's very easy to time your attacks and slowly drain heroes like Kylo and Vader of all of their stamina while you regenerate yours in between attacks. While heroes like Vader have far more total stamina than Luke does, Luke's regeneration is very quick, whereas Vader's is incredibly slow, and like health, every time you take a hit, the timer to begin regenerating your stamina completely resets, so by keeping that in mind, you can strategically take down even Vader in a 1v1. Do your best to not fall into the trap of block spamming all the time, as stamina is now a far more important commodity than it ever was. When it comes to Luke's movement, well, Luke is still one of the fastest heroes in the game. He can outpace pretty much anyone, and if your team ever leaves you stranded in HVV, which they will, Luke is one of the best heroes when it comes to making it back to your group alive. And if you have a Darth Maul on your tail, who is one of the only villains who can keep up with you, a simple force push will give you the distance you need to make it back alive. Speaking of the force push, let's move into Luke's abilities: repulse, rush, and of course, the push. Luke is currently the only hero whose abilities deal different damage to heroes and regular troopers, so we will be sure to specifically cover the damage properties for each enemy. We'll start out with Luke's center ability and what you would probably think would be his most powerful, repulse. This ability causes Luke to slam the ground around him, sending out a burst of force energy and dealing damage to enemies nearby. Repulse will deal 75 damage to heroes and 132 infantry, and unfortunately, even after a series of patches intended to help fix this ability, repulse is still one of the most unreliable attacks in Battlefront 2. About 30 to 40% of the time, this ability will do absolutely nothing, and has a very long animation that will leave you very exposed. For that reason, I recommend you use this ability with caution. When using this against villains, first try to catch them off guard with a force push or a rush, and then go in with the repulse from the back. That way you won't be completely exposed if the ability doesn't work, and with infantry, well, it's just best you don't leave yourself right in front of them while using it. Just do your best to be behind the enemy so they are unable to unload a blurg into your forehead if repulse refuses to kill them. If you are only taking on a single enemy, I recommend just not even bothering with Repulse and just killing them with your regular Saber Strike. Without any of the star card upgrades, Repulse will not kill any of the 4 classes in one shot, and deals a very moderate amount of damage to villains considering how lengthy the animation is. Repulse is a decent ability when it works, but after spending a lot of time with Luke, this ability's inconsistency is only topped by Kylo's Frenzy. Next up, we have Luke's Rush, which is a very simple ability. It's essentially an alternate Saber Strike for Luke that sends him swinging forward, damaging anything in his path. I tend to use this whenever I'm facing off against a player who loves to spam roll, as Luke's dash is much more likely to hit a player than his regular saber swings, and it also deals slightly increased damage with around 125 damage dealt, as opposed to his regular swing which deals 110. Luke's Rush is just simply okay. It's great for getting out of a corner if you're stun locked by another saber user, and very consistently will deal damage to players. It doesn't have the movement functionality that abilities like Maul's Spin or Rey's Dash Strike or even Yoda's Dash have. In fact, Luke's Rush actually slows his movement speed slightly. It is great for outplaying your opponents in saber fights and getting behind them, which is very important if you're playing as Luke, but definitely isn't his standout ability. Luke's most important ability is by far his push. Luke's Force Push sends enemies flying from him, dealing heavy damage and killing 3 of the 4 trooper classes in one shot. Like the Repulse, Luke deals a different amount of damage to troopers and heroes with his push. Enemy villains will take a loss of 90 HP, while infantry will take 150, and this ability is downright fantastic and among the best hero abilities in Battlefront 2. Again, like Repulse, Luke's push can be unreliable, but not nearly as often as Repulse. Maybe around 10% of the time Luke's push will just not work, but luckily it doesn't leave him nearly as exposed, so it isn't quite as big of a deal. In HVV, the push is great for knocking villains off ledges to their instant death, and on maps like Kamino and Kashyyyk, Luke is dominant with the right star cards, and heroes that are unable to block are defenseless if they are unaware of where to position themselves on those maps. The push is also fantastic for saving the target in HVV, and I cannot begin to tell you the amount of times I've seen my team's target surrounded by the enemy team, only to swoop in and push the group off of him and save my team a lost point. In Galactic Assault, it should be obvious what makes this ability great, as it one-hit kills every class but heavy, granting very easy kills if you know where the correct choke points are located and where to situate yourself to get those kills. His push does have a bit of a long cooldown, so I would recommend using it well. If I see only one guy who isn't really paying attention, I am not going to waste my push on him. I'll just do my best to take him out with my regular saber strikes. Now that we've covered Luke's abilities, it's time to move on to what you're all here for, the best setup for Luke. And I will be completely honest, Luke is a hero who has a ton of great star cards, and choosing what works best for you can be very difficult. I will do my best to give you my best recommendation for each situation, but I don't personally think there is a definitive best setup for Luke, as he has many excellent upgrades. Let's start out with Galactic Assault, which is the flagship mode of Battlefront 2. By far the most important star card for this mode, and the only one that you always should be running no matter the situation, is Cleansing the Darkness. This star card will give Luke 20 HP back every time he defeats a trooper, and 100 every time he defeats an enforcer or a villain. This is the only star card that is a necessity. If you aren't using this upgrade for Galactic Assault, you are quite simply just doing it wrong. This star card allows Luke to regenerate all of his health no matter how much damage he's taken, and will keep him in the game for way longer. You don't even need to upgrade this one to be effective with it in Galactic Assault. You will get the same HP back for defeating troopers whether you have it at base level or epic. The upgrades only increase the health gain for hero and enforcer kills. The next star card I would recommend is Extended Push Reach, which extends the range of Luke's force push by about 30% once epic, and before the push buff I would always toy around with my second and third slots, but after push was made to be such a dominant ability in Galactic Assault, I never take this card off for that particular game mode. If you are playing on a map with very tight choke points like Starkiller, Kamino, Naboo, Yavin 4, really just about any map there are some choke points present, this star card will get you way more kills, and I wholeheartedly recommend upgrading this card as it makes his push even more effective. For his final and third card, and this is where you can really play around to find what's best for you, I personally recommend Epicenter. This card gives Luke's Repulse a heavy damage buff within the inner half of its radius, dealing an extra 40 damage, which brings the total up against troopers to 170 and against villains to 115. What this means is, well, instead of not being able to kill any of the trooper classes in one hit, you will now be able to kill 3 out of the 4 instantly. I find this card makes Repulse much more reliable, and honestly, despite despite what I said earlier, I think this is the card setup I would fully recommend. Jedi Fighter will give Luke 10% extra stamina, but to be honest, Luke doesn't need it. It's nice, but unnecessary if you even kind of know what you're doing. Rush Immunity is okay as well. I see a lot of people recommend this one. It gives Luke a 15% 3-second damage reduction after using his rush, but the effect is very minimal, and I just find upgrading his repulse that drastically to be far more useful. Again, I can see toying around with the final card, but if you're here for my recommended setup, I would go with Cleansing the Darkness, Extended Push Reach, and Epicenter. For heroes versus villains, I still recommend Cleansing the Darkness and Epicenter, but Extended Push Reach is not necessary on most maps. Generally, I choose to run Rush Immunity in my third slot. If you time your rush when you're going to be taking the most heat and the most damage, that 15% damage reduction can give you the edge you need to stay alive. It's still a minimal change even in this game mode, but it's a good card in the right situations. However, and I'm sure a lot of you were waiting for me to talk about this, if you are on certain maps, namely Kashyyyk and Kamino, and the Naboo hangar if your team is stupid enough to hang out in the generator room with Luke on the loose, I personally recommend going all out on upgrading your Force Push and throwing on both Extended Push Reach, which of course gives you the extra range, and Stronger Push, which once fully upgraded, will double the distance players travel when hit with your push. This will allow for you to knock enemies off the map left and right, getting you tons of free kills and making for some of the most fun matches you will ever have. I am sure a lot of you are well aware of just how exhilarating it can be, sending an entire team of villains flying off the edge of a map. For Hero Showdown, just take off Cleansing the Darkness, as the health regen is pretty much worthless in that mode, and put on Epicenter for that extra damage. Rush Immunity to give you that small damage reduction, and throw on Jedi Fighter for the extra stamina. Unfortunately, Luke doesn't really have any other cards that will give him extra damage you want in that mode, but the extra stamina is a small help, but a help nonetheless. Now that we've covered the very basics of Luke, let's quickly go over a few points of strategy. DICE said way back when Luke was still a pretty weak hero that they were intending to make him a hit and run hero, and that is exactly what he now is. In Galactic Assault, Luke excels at rushing into situations, getting a few kills with his abilities, and retreating momentarily to let his health regenerate and his abilities recharge. Like most heroes, without his abilities, Luke can really struggle. The great thing about Luke is his versatility. We all know that hero that is so great during one phase, but really struggles on the next, and that isn't really ever a problem for Luke. No matter the situation, Luke will do just fine. His quick movement speed allows him to do well even in open areas, as he can be a difficult target hit for the enemy and can retreat before too much damage has been done to him. Clearing out entire rooms is something Luke can now do with ease, as his Force Push will take out everyone but heroes and heavies, and a follow-up repulse will deal with any stragglers. The only thing that's likely to end your run is a faulty ability, or rushing into a situation without backup, and unfortunately, faulty abilities are a dime a dozen when it comes to Luke. This does go for any hero, but it is very unwise to rush in as the only target. You want teammates to be able to take some of the damage for you and distract the enemies as you clear out choke points and objectives. Luke is not the best lightsaber hero for Galactic Assault. I've been praising him as I really like him, but he is far from the best hero. He is much better than Kylo and can stand toe-to-toe with Maul in my opinion, but Rey and Yoda are far more valuable for supporting your team. Luke may be able to get in more kills, but buffing your teammates' health and giving up the position of the enemy team will do a lot more in terms of holding back the enemy. With that being said, Luke does end up being my first choice a lot of the time, as he really is a fun hero that can hold his own, but just be warned, you are going to have to make up a lot more by playing well as Luke if you aren't giving them the strategic support. For HVV and Hero Showdown, Luke is a relatively straightforward hero. The most important thing is managing your stamina as you drain others, which we discussed earlier in the video. Luke is a very easy hero to learn in HVV, and once you know what his abilities do and where to use him, there isn't much more to it, to be honest. You just need to know how to counter everyone else. Just be sure to manage your ability cooldown, do your best to position yourself behind the enemy, and be sure you aren't trying to take on too many villains at once. If they are even semi-competent, they will wipe the floor with you. It's best to take on enemies one-on-one and pick them off separately. Guys, that is going to do it for today's episode of How to Not Suck. If you want to see more, be sure to drop this video a like to let me know. Also, be sure you are keeping yourself entered in the Force FX lightsaber giveaway. Make sure you are subscribed to the channel to keep up to date on that. The winner will be announced on August 31st. Make sure to leave a comment letting me know who you'd like to see covered next in this series if I continue it, as I will need to make my decision and figure out who I'm covering next very soon. But thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.